So this episode is in partnership with ProgressData.io, a research-based tool for HR managers to measure what matters when it comes to gender and diversity, pay gap, and creating parity reports with actionable improvement suggestions. That's ProgressData.io. So hello and welcome to How the Pod. This is the place where we pick the brains of changemakers about tech and society usually. But today, me and Catherine Burkinshaw, the research person at How the Pod, thought we were going to have a little yearly review of the first episodes that we did last year as a little special to start off 2021. Catherine Burkinshaw, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me talk today.
Yeah, well, I thought it would be really fun to just kind of go over what we have created last year.
Yeah, I mean, what a rich start to the podcast we've had.
Yeah, and I think it's been really appreciated, and people have been like, "Oh, that's been really fun," and here are some of the things that we found out and noticed, and so I'm thinking let's go through some of the insights and the takeaways that we've had. We've had 7 episodes. Our first guest out from last year was PhD Gisela Beklander. And she is a researcher in organizational behavior and has studied lots of tech companies and how we behave and how we use our cognitive functions to distribute our attention. And I think that was a really interesting episode that got me thinking that, being a product owner, it's easy to kind of understand that managing all the stuff that has to get managed is also a thing. But she said it so well.
Yeah, she was incredibly eloquent, and I love how well she explained her own research and how she made it feel very, very relatable, which has got to be an advantage of also being a published author, right? Just because you're making a living also out of explaining your work, making it accessible to the public. But I was really impressed about how insidious it can be to lose this constant amount of your capabilities a little every single day on completely unnecessary sort of hindrances or distractions. But I also thought how much of a spotlight we need to put on it in teams, because very few of us work completely alone. But I don't, unless you have an agile coach, whose job it is it to really shine a spotlight on when these behaviors are coming up, or how the whole team could benefit from having, say, a gatekeeper or a completely different office accessibility, whether you have office hours or hours when you can ask questions. Unless you have somebody who's really employed to do that, when do you ever take time to think about that stuff?
Yeah,
you could read the whole book. But if you wanted a short version, you could just listen to the episode and use it to, create your New Year's resolution to, take stock of your working life. And are you the bottleneck person? Are you adding to the bottleneck person's workload? Why don't you try doing this? And if you listen to some of her ideas and they're making you kind of jump up and down, think, yes, this is me, then please, you just say something, because there's got to be at least one other person in your team who feels the same way, right?
Absolutely. And also how to, in a gentle way, raise the awareness around how to manage your own workload so that you can actually perform, instead of managing your workload according to very loosely set or not at all set goals that people stress themselves up against, especially when you're younger and you can't set clear targets and clear goals, and maybe your employer won't do that for you. And if you don't know how to do that for yourself, you're very likely to burn yourself out, basically.
And it like, especially it being the end of the year, and it just seems to be like the time, like during the middle of the winter, and it's dark and you've been really pushing yourself, and it just feels like the season when we should be a lot more concerned about burnout and like a lot more vigilant of like, how do I notice if this is like, if I'm at risk of burning out. But the takeaway I really got from Gisela is that we, you know, so many of us are knowledge workers, and we should have a lot more respect for our mental resources. It wasn't something that she said, but it helped me to try and think of it as, if you're a craftsman, if you make things with your hands and you rely on your tools, if you saw something that was damaging your tools every day and all the time you use them, you wouldn't put up with that. You would take better care of them. And just because your tools are invisible and they're in your own brain, and they're your time and your energy and your ability to come up with creative solutions, you know, we should value that no less, even though it does make it a lot harder to see the damage.
That is such a good metaphor. It's a really, really good metaphor. Yeah, because you wouldn't. I mean, like, even if you talk about wellness, or as she in the kind of end alludes to, like mindfulness and Zen Buddhism, like if you have a broken knee, you'll take it to the doctor, right? But if you have a habit of not thinking about how you're thinking about things, well, it's really hard to sort that out.
But it was very empowering to hear her say that, like, you know, this is a book to help you with strategies, you know, how the person I am now can get this job done, not how the person I could be, or maybe I think I should be.
Yeah, that
should be getting work done. Yeah. It's like, no, I don't have to change in order to do things better. I'll still be me. I just need to use these different strategies. I don't have to do like all this meditation. I don't have to achieve this, you know, level of enlightenment. It was very down to earth advice.
So who would we say who is this episode for? What? Because I'm thinking it's a younger person that has had a year or 1 or 2 jobs, maybe even 3.
That makes sense to me. I also think that people who are in the middle of their career, I mean, people who are coming into the workplace today, if you're even the least bit curious and the least bit twigged, you know about mindfulness, right? You've heard people talk about burnout. Maybe you don't recognize it yet because you haven't done it yet. But it seems more like the people who are in the middle of their career, who didn't who didn't grow up with this idea of mindfulness and like that stress is a real illness. You know, there are people out there whose parents instilled them this idea that, no, if you're having a difficult time, you just knuckle down and you try harder. You know, anyone who hasn't yet allowed themselves to think about how their mental well-being affects their work. I mean, like, you don't have to go on with these old-fashioned ideas. You can take this really down to earth, you know, well-researched advice. Yeah,
right. So maybe it's more an episode that kind of concludes the way of the times rather than a specific age group. Because like work life has evolved, and it's more the work life time zone in one sense rather than an age group.
Yeah, perhaps. And definitely anyone who feels that they're maybe burning out, or they've burnt out repeatedly in their career and they still don't know why.
Yeah, that's a good conclusion, I'd say. Gosh, there's so much more I'd like to say about this episode, but I think we have to move on.
She was a real gem of information.
Yeah. We'll link to the book below. And then we did Emma Koshinovsky. She is a developer. She works for a broadcasting company, and she basically started this VR company with her team of, I think they're 5 or 6. And also just after we did the interview, she got funded, which is super interesting. And we're like, oh, congratulations. But she was like, well, how do you collaborate good in VR? Is this something that we've all spent endless meetings and meets and Zooms that are more or less well functioning or not? But the thing is, like, how do you portray where somebody's looking? Can you where's the center of the room and how do we mimic humanity in the best possible way to kind of be able to have an idea development or something else? And how do you create those virtual spaces?
I mean, here is a business whose need has for sure, like the time has come. We're all here in these, long meetings with our teams. And I swear there is definitely got to be some research out there being done right now on how remote video only meetings can achieve the same as regular meetings. But unless you're really good at running them, it probably takes like 20-25% longer, because you are not picking up on a lot of the information that is so immediate if you're in the same room with somebody. And I would really like to see somebody compare live meetings to video meetings to virtual meetings and prove that virtual is as effective at a whole human communication. So you've got all the non-verbal and the verbal and the physical, space, draw stuff, post-its, all of that, in a way that you can feel hampered in video. It can feel like it just draws on, and I wonder if it would be more effective if we could just instantly snap into VR. Not that you want them to be as long or, that you take the same amount of time in VR, but could you get it done in a clearer and more effective way?
And also, I think people zone out less.
Yeah, exactly. It's the zoning out that I mean. If you feel only 70 to 80% connected with the people, you're that much more psychologically distanced. But it's also great to see this business idea, which is so clearly needed, riding success on the back of an entertainment wave. Right, so anyone who bought a VR headset, they didn't necessarily buy it for meetings, they bought it for gaming. But this business is totally going to capitalize on that growing market of anyone who has the headset is then a prime target to try out this service and, proselytize it.
Yeah, I'm thinking finally we can buy a VR headset and use it for company purposes. Yay!
I'm sure Scatterback is going to love that one.
Yes. But I'm also thinking how many minutes can you save and what is that worth in a year for a company?
Lot, right? Yeah.
It is a real thing, because it's easy to kind of joke about it and be like, oh, we can do this. But if I'm thinking as a UX researcher, as a product owner, if I can point to a sketch, which I can do in Figma with a collaborator, but if I can also just move around, and of course I could get a Miro board or whatever, right? The older real-time board.
Gosh, no, I'm just thinking about the psychological wellness and the employee satisfaction of feeling more connected again. And we're going to be working remote for a time yet. And more of us will continue to work remote. We won't all go back to the office after COVID. We need to find ways for people to be happy working remotely for a long time.
Yeah. And there's so many people who are changing their jobs during COVID, and some of them have never even met their teams.
Yeah, right.
They've never physically seen each other. I mean, they've seen each other over Meet, but you have no idea which mannerisms this person has, or I guess maybe you do, but still, to some extent, it would be so much nicer too. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if we have any listeners have ideas oh, this is a topic I'd like to do, or a mass idea development or something. Let us know.
Yeah, get in touch.
And then we have another Emma. Then we have Emma Heikensten. A really brilliant. Actually, she's my old co-founder for a company that we did for diversity a few years, measuring diversity research based. But she also at the same time joined something called Ownership, which is a think tank. And she's basically gone over a bunch of meta studies, or she's done a bunch of meta studies on that resulted in 2 different reports. One is called Who Owns Sweden? And surprisingly enough, it is not the women, it's men. And the ratio is pretty surprisingly
stark,
low. And then the second one is how come they, where she kind of investigates, or were they together, because she brought on a bunch of other researchers as well, where they basically investigate what are the norms that lead to this. And they've basically taken, I think it's 8 or 12 of the most popular norms or the most impactful norms that lead to women not owning. And sure, it can be historical, legal, how the system works, but also all the other things that most people, I think, are not aware of.
But also the historical aspect is some of the most important stuff, because that is how cumulative interest works. You needed to start 50 years ago.
Yeah. And I just think, like, if you want to have a good financial life, and that's also included if you like have a child, like make sure your boyfriend takes half the time or whatever, or at least like have the dialogue, right? Or be sure that if you don't have the dialogue, this is what you're signing, or if you're not doing it, this is what you're signing off for, because that pension has to come from somewhere.
I thought this episode really foreshadowed what Heaven Berrickett had to say to a huge degree. But I also was very reminded of a book which I read a decade ago and loved, called Spouseonomics. It's probably on my bookshelf here.
I'm gonna write
oh, it's awesome. And it goes into way more detail about how to redress, the economic and like behavioral balance in families. So it's not even primarily directed at parents. This is like a relationship dynamic. And what she said, where you should make sure that you take equal amount of time to do the things that will drive your business, drive your career. Like that's not only like sharing the childcare. That is kind of, it's a further step in like psychologically advocating for yourself, to yourself, that your career also needs to have like equal amounts of effort put in. Like you can't just put aside time for the family if you're sacrificing your own kind of financial and business interests long term. That will come back to bite you.
Because then the child, and most commonly then the daughter, looks up at her mother in this case and says, oh, but if she's not doing it, I have no role model showing me how it's done.
Yeah. How do you even learn? Yeah, the point about where do we get our financial education from? Where do we learn basic financial literacy? And it seems that unless you're lucky enough to have a parent who is financially literate and like is conscious enough that that is something should be taught and at least modeled. But how often do people talk about this in their families? I hope a lot, because it's not exactly being talked about publicly. One of the most frustrating things I think I can see is that we don't talk openly about salary or about our finances. It is not, acceptable in polite society to, just start chatting about your personal finances.
And this is so interesting, because you're a Brit in Sweden, right? When I moved to London, I was fascinated that when people are looking for developers or tech people, they're like, the salary is here and plus and they will show you what range they're at, and you can say, this is interesting or not. I'm only going for these jobs, or whether you want to go up or down and
Yes.
take more or less responsibility. You can make an active choice.
This is a significant cultural difference I have found, and I find the equivalent experience of searching for jobs in Sweden, and obviously from the opposite perspective, from trying to hire in Sweden, is so opaque. How do you know what they're wanting? Because clearly most people who write job descriptions have no idea what it is they want. Like that's a whole separate body of research. But also, if we don't talk about this, then new hires come in and, okay, they manage to negotiate themselves some sort of salary, possibly with the help of a union, who has, a huge trove of, pan-society data points they can advise you on. But that doesn't tell you what the other people who got hired this year and last year and 3 years ago got hired at. And unless you're like confident enough to chat with people, say, hey, I'm new, I negotiated this salary, did I make a mistake? You don't get to find out that information ever. And that cycle of like perpetually underpaying people who don't advocate for their best possible salary, i.e. usually the women. How do we ever uncover this pattern?
Yeah. And it really takes having like somebody who will advocate for you. So actually, this reminds me of this really interesting thing. I once got hired by a man who we started talking about salary. And this is a phenomenal.
Before or after you got hired?
During the process.
Okay.
As a part of the thing. And this is a great story of men advocating for women. And I'm so happy because I've had so many like positive, good male bosses. And here's the thing that he did. He's like, well, you know, the developer so-and-so, let's just call her N. So when she got hired, she asked if it was okay to have the phone number and have a chat with the other developers to establish her salary, because it was also her first job. For me, it was a bit different because I had already worked in the industry and so on. But you know of the few of the people on the team already, Heidi. So why don't you take a few days and have a chat? And, I mean, there's clearly no one with your role or with your background in the same way or with as many years on hold. But, you don't have to answer me right now, but let's have a chat about it.
See, openness.
Yes.
That's incredible. Yeah, I have never, ever heard of anyone saying that, like in any salary negotiation. Shout out to that person, whoever they are. You're great, and you should be a role model for anyone else hiring out there. And it is the season. It's a new year.
We're actually going to try to get him on here. I've already talked to him.
Good.
He's quite he's cool.
Anyway, so as Emma says, women don't own nearly enough of Sweden as they really should, given that we are apparently a free and equal society. And we all need to learn more about how to invest the money that we are earning, assuming that we are earning enough. And that the tools really are out there. And she's written a whole, set of reports which you should read and take inspiration for and feel empowered to actually do something about getting your pension invested properly. And not just, trying not to think about it, which was definitely the attitude I took for a good long while, because it's scary to think about your finances.
Oh, yeah, because you might do something wrong, God forbid.
Or you might realize just how little you have in more.
Yeah, that is also the other painful thing that kind of speaks against you actually, or against the one actually acting on your own behalf. Mm-hmm. This kind of brings me to skipping a few episodes that we can come back to, but I kind of want to talk about Heaven Barakat.
Rebel.
Immediately. Because she talks about generational wealth and how she being, 18? Usually in Sweden, when you're 18, your parents have saved for you and you get a chunk of money, which you immediately waste, or some people don't. I mean, I didn't get any money. So when she kind of said it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting. My parents did support me in lots of other ways, so I'm not going to be like that. But it was interesting because it really does call upon the fact that, like, hey, everybody doesn't have parents who are financially literate and who will save you 100,000 crowns through birthdays. Sure, you get a gift, but then you get 200 crowns. But, over the years and compound from X amount of people in your family, that's like the down deposit to a first apartment.
It was a really kind of richly nuanced episode. There was so much there, like the disparity in wealth, kind of resources for immigrant families, for unaccompanied minors arriving in Sweden and needing, the state to support them, and like what happens to people when they come of age and they don't have financial support, and how much bigger the step is they have to take to, try and bootstrap themselves. And it's not easy for anyone trying to get started in the world, trying to work out how they're going to make their way and make sensible decisions about their career. And if you're also worrying about, okay, well, I'm doing it with, zero financial input from anyone else at this point, I can definitely see, this passion that she describes, being this angsty teenager and being pissed off at the world. And then like converting that into it's got to start somewhere. I am going to be
the one,
the first, person to invest for my family's future. And then whatever drives this woman, like, could be harnessed and drive a whole bloody country, because she decides not only to learn how to make enough money for herself so that she could invest and give her children or her grandchildren or both a financial stable like environment. And she decides to do it for a whole charity, for a whole community in another country that she feels, bonded to from her African heritage. I'm like, this woman is supporting how many generations at this point?
I mean,
she's amazing.
Simply remarkable. And I also like the part where about the, let's trade Forex, or I couldn't get the money into Ethiopia. I don't think this is actually in the podcast, but I've had a conversation with her separately. Like, you can't, no bank will trade the local currency of Ethiopia. So you want to get the money in, you use blockchain or tokens, or Bitcoin or whatever you need. Because at least that
cryptocurrency.
It's not a lot more stability, but at least it will get traded.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And that's how she got into it. It's, quite a remarkable woman.
No, I thought what was really a great takeaway from Heaven was that she had such a clear focus on the long-term outcomes. She started off with I am going to build a future, not for myself, not so I can have a wealthy, middle age. No, I'm building for my grandchildren. And then, when she looks at the situation in the African community, she's like, no, I'm going to build for the long term. So I'm going to invest in local initiatives that are on the ground. And I'm only going to invest if I can ensure that this is going to go the distance. So it doesn't suddenly dry up and doesn't go anywhere, which is a failing of new started charities.
Yeah.
She's so clear-eyed about the need for long-term improvement. And look at the things she chose. She chose clear and simple ways to save children's lives, which obviously has the maximum long-term benefit because they get to have a life, right? And then she goes on to initiatives which improve education and continuing attendance at school, a lifelong benefit of an education. And then she goes on to support things that will create healthcare, another lifelong benefit for women and children through supporting that institution. And yet she's so humble. She's really focused on how everyone else has tried something. Everyone else has tried, someone has tried the thing that you want to do. You just need to speak to enough people and you will be able to learn how to do it or how not to do it, equally important. And I really think that her openness and her curiosity is really inspiring.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Quite remarkable. And then we have, moving on to Joseph Conning, who is an urbanist. And, it's kind of, I just took him because we all walk in cities or not in cities. At some point in our life, we've been to cities. We've had a city surround us. And he basically went from being a UX researcher and a cognitive scientist to working as an urbanist, where you kind of employ the same methods of research and participatory design or participatory research into creating something, to molding something, and delivering those insights to the city planners who take that on and design accordingly.
It must be such a strange shift to make from somebody working from UX and, human outcomes, which, typically how long would your project be, months to years, and your iteration is how fast. And, we're all working, to iteratively test something, or your outcome is measured in even a matter of weeks, to suddenly take on projects where the outcome is not only planned in the years, but experienced in the decades. And so this shift to create an outcome which is flexible to be repurposed, but has to last for decades, and whose evaluation will be the human experience of it over decades. Yeah. And I assume there's not many UX people who go into the business thinking like that.
I think there's utterly few, and he's really interesting in that sense, where he's done that journey. Because I do think it's kind of, I don't know how many people do this. It's quite rare. But he's clearly like just followed his heart and maybe been, taken a chance or two on doing odd projects and then been greatly rewarded. He also kind of,
it's niche.
It is so niche. And he also kind of describes how it used to be, right? In the past, we would have, basically quoting him, white old men designing the city for other old white men. And then how do we avoid, creating amazing mistakes that will last 100 years? Well, participatory design is the most important thing if you want to see what everybody wants in a city.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not only the people who happen to work with him who are aware that participatory design is the way forward. It is like a shift across the whole industry. But that just means that there are like more and more companies out there who would probably be open to working with UX designers because they have the skill set, because they have the human focus that they are looking at. And like beyond that even, you can tell from any, true expert's passion to like want other people to be passionate about their subject is how much he wants the average citizen to be more involved, to get more involved in local initiatives like the greening projects where you create little parks or you create little planting gardens. And the desire he has for local authorities, municipalities, to be more open, to be more supportive, to like usher these things along instead of, erecting a lot of bureaucratic barriers. I thought one of the points that he brought up about, the differences between different cities and how they approach kind of experimental urban design as being like an economic driver. What type of city do you have to be to want to experiment with modern urban design in this participatory way in order to attract new people versus like a large city that doesn't need to attract more people, but like has more of a focus on conserving, hundreds years old monuments and neighborhoods. And I studied memorialization of spaces in my master's, so I'm fully on board with like the significance that a physical landscape has and how that can change over time. And I was really interested to see like what sort of places you think you live in. Like if you are living in a city, what's your experience of things changing around you? Like, and do you think you live in a place which is like actively trying to attract a new population? Or do you see your place kind of gradually being depopulated and wish you could see this sort of change? Or do you actually, you think your place is pretty good as it is and you wish they would slow down on the change? I'd love to hear from people about this.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also kind of interesting. I just read the other day that people are like moving away from Stockholm because they don't want to live here now. And I'm like, wow, who would have thought that would ever be a thing?
But wasn't there like a move in the 70s?
Yes.
To like go back to the land, to the communities outside? We cannot write COVID out of this picture. There's a lot going on in the world right now. Remote working is more possible than ever. There's many, many things dovetailing into that move. But I'm curious to see the numbers. It's early days.
It's early. We'll circle it in and we'll come back to it.
Yeah, let's come back to this.
Yes, good one. And then we have Annika Lidne, tech profile, founder of Dramatify. She's a seasoned entrepreneur that has now started a company called Dramatify, which makes it easier for broadcasters it's like a project management tool for broadcasters that allows to include as many people as possible as you need, like make everything from makeup to production to scriptas to anything. But she doesn't necessarily talk as much about her tool, but she does talk about how to think, whether you want to become the next unicorn or if you want to raise money as a woman.
Yeah, what it's like to be an entrepreneur as your career, what it's like to take this step. I would say that although this is not a term I ever use about anyone, Annika is the most badass person I have ever met. in a moderately terrifying and hugely inspiring sort of way.
Yes, she's also this, and she's remarkable in the sense where I mean, she dares to say things out loud, like, there's only these few percents that actually get funding. If you're a female funded company, you will get 1 to 2%. If you're a blended funded company, women and men, 7% chance. So, why don't you just get a handsome MBA guy to run your company, get more money, just get the money in and move on and build your idea.
Even if you've only increased your chance of getting funding or the amount of funding you might get by a factor of 3 or 4 compared to like the other 93% of the cake, it's still worth doing, right? To become a blended team. And maybe we'll see that percentage growing over time. But I'd say that this episode was a really great one for anyone who is interested in new business ideas, because she has such great insight for would-be entrepreneurs into like what blossoming business opportunities there are with climate change, with COVID, with remote working, with like the food industry tech taking off. Like a huge variety of industries are changing, and she has ideas about so many of them. And like also to highlight that entertainment is no longer the poor relation, in terms of the cultural scene, and it is in fact a huge industry that is well worth investing in, and therefore it is well worth working in this industry if you have an idea that could help revolutionize the way production is done or something similar.
And especially I think it's really interesting because this makes her the early mover.
Sure.
Which means she gets a large chunk of the cake. That is a calculated, very good strategic move.
But again, she had a really like sensible message that she worked in this industry literally from her childhood as a child voice actor, and she still says that scrap what you think you know, go and learn. Like, she was really surprised to discover that the B2B market from an investor perspective was really hot so long as you're looking outside of Sweden.
Yeah.
Like, she had to go out there and find that herself. So, forget your old thinking about investors and where to find them. Like, no, start fresh. The world has changed. I think Annika should teach an MBA.
Oh, yeah. Easily.
She would be awesome at that.
She would be amazing. Moving on, we've got Dora Pelfy.
Last but certainly not least.
Yeah. And she is also a very remarkable young woman. She's a team. They're a team, actually. And most of these companies are, right, that we've been talking about.
Indeed.
But she and her colleagues developed a toy that makes it fun for young adults, young teenagers, specifically young teenage girls, to find the magic in coding and programming. So they started with it. They've had a few different products, but now recently they've developed the Magic Charm, which is the product on the market today. And so she basically tells the story of how they got there and how it is different from building a software product. It's a hardware product. And, with software, you can iterate endlessly. But with hardware, you come to a point where you actually, you can go buy local components here down in the store and, make your thing and kind of, but then at some point you have to ship it off to China or wherever you're producing it. If you haven't uploaded the firmware, well, then you have to open 3,000 boxes and have your engineer upload the firmware.
Yeah. You can just hear the midnight oil burning, can't you? Yeah, but kind of life decisions. Every startup's got to have an experience like that. It's character building, I'm sure. I really liked how this is it's a neat toy. It's fun. It's popular, but their company is a secret educational powerhouse. I mean, they have designed an idea to subversively get young women involved, especially very young women involved in coding. they are building in the next generation of women in tech. And unless you start quite young, it's going to take a really long time to shrink the gender imbalance. But those young women will graduate and be on the workforce in a matter of years. And now when they're like reiterating and coming up with the next product, they're focusing more on things that are going to develop those skills, not just start at the next, like start all over again from the next bunch of kind of 12 to 16-year-olds to get them started from 0 to 1, as she said. Like, how do we not only grow the community, but grow the skills of the community? This is a long-term educational program. It's so under the radar.
It's cool in that sense. Because like there's not only the toy, but then you continue into the universe of like maximizing your coding skills. Of course, everything is gamified. It's easy to pick up. You pick up and you can, I could share my code with you. I could take some of your code, but make it into something else. Like there's this thing in the programming universe, or at least when you're beginning, called the code pen, which is exactly that. You pick up some code, you make it a little bit better. You can see the code examples. It's like specifically for animations. And then, further down the line, you might get into GitHub or GitLab or whatever, which is a little bit...
Yeah, they seem to have created a microcosm in gamified terms of GitHub, which is so cool.
Yeah. And like we've both worked at this Tekla Festival, where it's a specific like initiative for young girls in Sweden. So I think they draw like one girl from every postcode in Sweden. It's a project with the Royal Academy of Technology. And they've been doing it for several years. And Ellen soon got me into doing this dancing robots concept where we program robots for kids. And I can just speak from my own workshop. But like seeing the girls coming in and being like, oh my God, that sounds really complicated, to walking out and being like, hey, you know what? I've built a robot. Do you mind stepping out of my way? And that confidence of just like, being able to say like, I've done this. I know how to do this is remarkable. And I mean, she was like in the room next door. So, I mean, I know that she was doing the exact same thing. And everybody who was participating at that conference year after year, that's what they do. It's a really remarkable project.
Dora herself had such great advice in terms of like staying true to your focus. Like it's very important to take on lots of different, like to listen to lots of different voices as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and when you're testing out a completely new product. But like trying to balance that with don't just get swayed by the last voice you heard, by the next kind of shiny opportunity, and don't let it sidetrack you from your goal. Like those, I can see that being challenging to balance, but like definitely necessary message. Yeah,
and also I really liked we had a listener question, which was like, oh, did you have a challenging point at any point in your business? Because everything can't just be shiny, happy. And I mean, even when you're interviewing someone, just shiny, happy just doesn't make a good story. But she says, well, it's a question of wording, really. I'm like, oh my God, this is so dramatic. And then she says this, well, you only really fail when you stop trying. And that just hit me so deep. I was like, of course, that is so right.
She does sound like a self-help book, but you can tell it comes from the heart because like this crazy positivity is the defining takeaway that I got from Dora, like as a personality.
Yeah.
I can see that she would be a force to be reckoned with, to work with. And I'm no surprise as to why they have had such success, why they have managed to persist and like persist with many different types of funding rounds. I mean, not to want to make it sound too easy, but you can tell that she has the right sort of personality and the right sort of drive to get up and every day have a smile on her face and like go back to the drawing board if that's what's necessary.
But I also imagine like if you're doing your first startup or your second or your third or whatever it is you're doing in life, right? Like, of course, everybody's going to have challenges. I mean, they're going to be smaller or larger, but that's kind of relative because a challenge is a challenge, right?
Mm.
It does impact you on the daily, but also remembering that when you have challenges, that the choices you have are, well, either you stop doing something, you pause doing something, which is usually almost the same thing as stopping doing something, or you just decide that I will do this no matter what. I might extend the timeline, for example.
Or might change the scope, or might change the technique.
Yeah. But I will not stop. And what other angles do I have? That was really good. I like that about her.
Yeah, it seemed to be like really emotionally healthy, like being kind to yourself, celebrating every time that you try and you learn, or you try and you succeed.
Yeah. And I think, summing that up, I'm kind of thinking that's what we managed to do through 7 episodes in 2020, which are also our first 7 episodes. And I'm like, wow. I feel good.
We started, in the studios. We survived going remote. We survived having to stop meeting in person. All the new technology. And like my takeaway from our guests was that if you're going to start something, like they seem to have found success, whatever you classify that as, because they had more curiosity than fear. Like fear of failure, sure, that's a human condition, but in whatever way they presented it, in like whatever personality they had, from the insanely positive to the hard as nails to the kind of the quietly diligent, very conscientious, they all persisted because the outcome was worth more to find out that they could do it than the struggles of whatever they went through to get there.
And they've managed to change the industry or the environment. They've had impacting change on people around them due to their projects being successful.
Yeah, and or you can see like the small changes that are now and the snowballing effect. Whether your ideas are sort of early stage or sort of fully realized.
Yeah,
What's ever fully realized? We are never done. None of these ideas are ever actually done.
And therefore the podcast, because apparently everything changes all the time.
Yeah. And we have so much more exciting stuff to come.
Yes, we do. That is exciting, for sure. On that note, we can start rounding off a bit. And I'm thinking, if you guys want to help us out a little bit, do follow us on where you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify or somewhere else. We would also like to say thank you to Helio Studios, or helio.se, that has a podcasting studio. They have them all around Stockholm, who've been super generous. Huh?
We miss you.
Yes, we miss you so much, and we really hope that this state of the world will soon be helped and over so that we can come and hang out in your studio, because we loved it so much. And
shoot us some ideas on what topics you want to see next. We don't only feature women in tech, we also feature men sometimes. So if there is a subject out there, a field, a research topic, a particular author, a particular book you felt inspired by,
a remarkable idea,
message us.
Yeah.
Send us an Instagram or a tweet.
Yes, please. All right. We wish you the best of the best for the new year. We hope that you take care, take inspiration, and put it into action, and continue having a fabulous 2021. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.